Hello, Farming Secrets community, and welcome to another Let's Talk session. Today, I'm joined by Gerhard. How are you doing?
Good, thank you, Ray. How are you at Farming Secrets?
Oh, very well, as always, changing the world, one soil health by one soil patch by patch.
Yep. Oh, good.
And so we're going to be chatting today about your soil experience. And one of the questions I've been asking all the guests on the show is, what does soil mean to you?
Oh, so what does soil mean to me? It means life. It means stability. It means food. It means that we've actually got some way of managing the global landscape in a way that's healthy and allows us to keep the planet going for future.
Love that. This is like the third or fourth time I've heard this whole soil is life. So just share with everyone what you've been working on and how what you've been doing around soil over the last few years.
Okay. Well, maybe I should preface where I've come from in the sense of what the whole driver is for me in my journey on this planet so far. By saying that I grew up in a family here in Australia that came from Austria. My parents are Austrian, and I was born only some months after they arrived here. But as a toddler, my mother would take me out into the garden and hold my hand and look up to the moon and say, oh, it's time to plant some seeds now. And we were all excited as kids, and being the oldest of four. And then my little brother, 2 years younger, would come out as well occasionally, but he wasn't quite as interested. And we would plant the radishes and look at the moon and go, oh, when are these seeds going to finally give us something to eat? Because a promise was made, you know. Anyway, I guess that connection was something that was seminal for me in my life, that my mother brought to me the whole notion that we were part of a world that was beyond just our immediate contact or immediate presence. So some years later, I decided to grow a veggie garden at home when I moved out of home, and that's been something that's been a practice ever since. So the veggie garden was an original connection. In my working life, in my professional life, I went to work in the engineering field and got a Guernsey working down in the Latrobe Valley on 10 acres of land that we bought only 10 k's away from my workplace. And that became the place where I really learned how to manage the soil, nurture the soil, and even grow a commercial flower crop without any chemical use or any interventions that were considered to be harsh or damaging to the environment. So at that stage, then I started to venture out a bit further and became involved in some of the organic growing groups in East Gippsland, and also some years later involved at a national level with the Organic Federation of Australia, and organised the what was then called the Gippsland Organic Livestock Group. So we had spurts of energy and enthusiasm to help promote organics to where it's come to today. So in the meantime, the work that I was doing was actually putting a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, and since those heady days of doing that work, I've been able to acquire a bigger farm now in a place called Halston in the Strzelecki Ranges, and extended my practice somewhat more with my son running the farm for 10 years on 127 acres. And from there, we ran it biologically. It didn't get certified organic, but for various reasons, I won't go into it at the moment, but suffice to say that the intention was to keep it all as natural as possible and build the soil back up again after the farm had been a dairy farm for some 30 or 40 years, and a lot of conventional fertilizers were applied. The soil is very dead, and these days it's just full of life. So, and that's what it's about. So basically in that period of time as well, in parallel with my work and doing the hands-on stuff with the growing many years ago, I ventured into the business side a little bit as well and started a little business called Sea Grow Products. which came from some seaweed products. It was a compost that came out of southeast of South Australia. And from that, I was fortunate enough to link up with Hugo and Helen Disler of what is now the principles, with yourself, Ray, of course, of Farming Secrets. And Hugo and Helen were very much akin with their views on life, and basically we hit it off really well, and loved the approach of being gentle and kind to the planet and to the environment that we're working in. So the whole notion of where we were taking things with the seaweed, with the fish, which is what Hugo and Helen were actively involved in, then with the Vitec label as the initiator of that product here in Australia, allowed us to learn more about where organics and biological farming was taking us, and turn to this century, and we're finding that we're talking about soil health, and more recently we're talking about regen ag. So really they were those days, just by a different name, that the practices that are touted now as regenerative agriculture were being practiced way back then. So with that holistic sensitivity of being able to give back to the land rather than just keep on taking from it.
Yeah, excellent. And what got you linked up with I feel like you've been very busy, which is awesome, and thank you for sharing that, because I think it's really interesting to hear how all the dots have joined, and I think a lot of times people question why they're meeting certain people. But thinking back when you first met Helen and Hugo, what was your curiosity to go down this path?
I guess it goes back to what my mother sort of indicated to me when I was a toddler, to say, hey, there's so much out there that we can still learn. And I remember she put on lime and tried a few things that were considered to be probably less than conventional. But being Austrian and coming from the Rudolf Steiner country of biodynamics and the Steiner thinking and Steiner school, I'm sure that she had some influence that she carried with her from her days as a daughter of a farm worker who spent many hours out in the field, even when planes were overhead bombing away and doing their thing. Mum told a story about that, but we won't go there at the moment. But suffice to say, it just meant that there was this connection with this planet that we're so fortunate to be on. Yeah.
And when you share that, it reminds me of my grandparents. When they migrated here to Australia, they also plant based on moon patterns and cycles of the seasons and the calendar. It is definitely an art that's kind of been a little bit lost, and everything is just about yields and inputs, and just let's create a falsified environment for things to grow. And as the years have progressed, we're starting to see that isn't working as well as everyone thought, and that we better just let Mother Nature do what they do best.
Definitely. Yeah, and really part of that is not to just have faith in the esoteric and work on just the intuition, but then also say, hang on, there is a logical side here, and some of the science that is out there actually has a legitimate place in being applied in a biological system. A lot of it doesn't. A lot of it's self-serving, and to try and encourage farmers to buy inputs, buy machinery, and do everything but actually work with the natural systems that we've been able to inherit. And so part of where my thinking was going way back then when I was growing the cut flowers, I thought, what else is possible? And so I did a bit of study in the field of plant propagation and a lot of reading to understand what it is that creates a plant and how it actually becomes the energy harnessing conduit for the sun to put life back into the earth as well. And part of that then was the initial meeting in the year 2000 with Dr. Elaine Ingham, and then subsequently to that, 5 years from about 2003 onwards, I actually hosted her and facilitated her delivering workshops and short day sessions down here in Victoria. And that became the opportunity for me to fill a lot of gaps in my knowledge and understanding, and then ask more questions, of course, which is the part that we should be doing. We don't ever have all the answers. There's just so much complexity and detail that we need to understand before we bucker things up completely.
Yeah, and I love how you say that, to be curious, and that is definitely what we love about the Farming Secrets Network. Is you said it before, it's like you do something, then you say, what's next? Like getting that problem solved is enough, but what's next? What's the next way that you can see that? And the initiative to bring Elaine Ingham here and host events, and that's a really good kind of kind gesture as well, because you're learning, but you're also enabling other people to learn with you. So it's definitely like a great way of making sure that everyone wins together. So there's no doubt to know that your upbringing and your curiosity has got you interested in soil. Now, with all your decades of knowledge and experience, what do you look for signs of healthy soil?
I look for a number of things, and I guess I take it back to what I call the new NPK. And the new NPK really is about recognising that the old NPK, for those that aren't familiar with it, is actually something that is very narrow, but definitely applicable to a growing situation where we need to understand that the nutrients that a plant needs is housed in the amount of nitrogen, the amount of phosphorus, the P part, the K part, the potassium. And so that element is still legitimate, and I would call those nutrients. So the N part of the new NPK is nutrients. I then look at the physical condition and say, all right, what physically can I learn from the soil and the plants that tells me the condition it's in? And so the physical condition would be measured by checking on soil compaction using, say, a soil penetrometer. And a very powerful tool is the work of Graham Shepherd that comes in the form of this book called Visual Soil Assessment. And Graham's work, Graham's a soil scientist of 10 years putting this book together. He comes from New Zealand, and he's managed to bring the art and the science together of soil by being able to get a 10-step process in place that anyone can do and interpret that information in a way that it has some meaning to it, so that you can then assess the physical condition of how the soil is when you do the VSA, the Visual Soil Assessment. So the K part of the new NPK, if we move on to that actually then tells me what it is that we've got happening in the soil as far as the life. The K part is the key biology. And the key biology includes the whole soil food web, which means you're dealing from bacteria right through to earthworms and springtails and calembulas and mites and so on as well, some of the less microscopic organisms. But the microscopic ones are the ones that really are the ones that we have difficulty in managing because we can't see them without a microscope. And that whole soil food web concept was put forward by Elaine Ingham. And that provided a springboard in being able to say, okay, what's actually taking place in the soil? What indicators can I get? And interestingly enough, once you do the VSA several times, and you might even consider doing some soil testing for the key biology from the soil food web approach of analysing the soil, then you can make a connection between what you see in the visual soil assessment. And most particularly, one of the steps in the VSA is the earthworms and the earthworm counts. And what Graham has been able to do is scientifically validate the numbers that are there. He's got three different categories of how many earthworms you need to find and how many species in doing the VSA. And then that relates to how much aeration there is in the soil. And so I guess the message there is to say, hey, we don't necessarily have to go out there and run an aerator or any machinery if we manage those organisms properly, particularly the earthworms, which is the ones we can see. But then we smell the soil as well. and then we can say, oh, the soil is a bit fungal. And so if we look at the data from the lab report that we've got the key biology done on, we can go, oh, well, there's an indicator to us that it's, as soil smells fungal, it's got more carbon in it. Therefore, we go back to the nutrient assay that's been done by the lab, and the figures say, hey, the carbon levels are good. Then you can say, all right, you can do a VSA, and it links back to both those other two parameters that we're trying to measure. So how do we measure a soil's performance? Well, that depends on the crop as well, and the situation that we're in. Things like aspect, things like how the soil has been managed historically, and whether there's any what's the word I'm thinking of? If there's any residue or any effect from past management that is still having to be dealt with, such as compaction, for example. The compaction's been there for 20 or 30 years if the soil hasn't had a chance to be rejuvenated and given a rest.
And I think a lot of farmers do inherit property, and there is legacy issues or legacy things that have happened, and that all needs to be part of the diagnosis. You know, it's not good or bad. It's just, it is what it is. And that is what's really important, is just to kind of go, this is the canvas I've got. How do I turn this into a beautiful artwork?
Exactly. And it is that. And it is the art. The art is the important part. And I think people don't have the confidence that they've got the ability to actually use those senses that we've all been dealt with, we're given. And basically it is about recognising they're as legitimate as a piece of paper with a lot of data on it. In fact, even more so, because a lot of that data can be misinterpreted. The sampling could have been done incorrectly. There's a lot of error possibilities in acquiring data, but very difficult with the way that Graham has formatted this guidebook of visual soil assessment to actually get that wrong. And that was demonstrated by the 2-day course that I did with him some years ago now, where there were 16 of us on the course, and we were all within a point of each other when we did the final test out in the paddock. And basically, before that, I was using the Northern Rivers Soil Health Card as a guide to try and start making some sort of sense of what soil was doing. But given that there wasn't any pictures associated with it, the interpretation could be open a lot. But with the way that Graham's put that book together, there's a lot of clarity in there about what is right and where things are at and what you're seeing, and then being able to garner the information that's in there to do it. And he explains that very well too.
Excellent. Yeah, and the book, for everyone who's listening who may not have got it, I think you should write this down, is Visual Soil Assessment, and sometimes it's also referred to as a VSA. So if you hear the acronym VSA, that is what people are normally referring to, is to do a visual soil assessment. And it does bring back that, the art of observing, and our First Nation people did it really well, where they would know the sounds and the rhythm of the planet, and we can bring that back to our knowledge source as well, just to be a lot more in tune, to be walking through the paddock and say, oh, that's looking a bit different. I need to pop that on the to-do list of digging deeper and finding out more. So I love the visual soil assessment, and I think that's something that's really comes up a lot, is that farmers have got their head in the business, and they're doing a lot, being busy, throwing chemicals and inputs, and jumping from one quick fix to the next, call it band-aiding, but then not getting to the root cause of why a particular plant is always coming up, and we call it a weed, but that plant is screaming at us and telling us there's something not right, and we can either ignore it or we can choose to visually assess it and go, what's that trying to tell me? So that's awesome. I believe you've also a big fan of the penetrometer. Is that how you say it?
Oh, the soil penetrometer. Yeah. The soil penetrometer is something that is being increasingly used now. And it's interesting that I've sent quite a few over to Western Australia. There in the Sandbelt country there's quite a few people that are starting to use it there, because believe it or not, sand does actually compact down very solidly. And so the soil penetrometer, I just happen to have one here at the moment, it it's a device that's got a pressure gauge on the top of it, and those two handles are used to push down into the soil. There's a very pointy, very sharp point. In fact, it draws blood if you're not careful, that you push into the soil. And that's what the farmers in WA are using, and increasingly here in Victoria as well. A number of the land care groups have been acquiring those. And it's a simple way of determining whether, in fact, you've got the ability to accommodate a plant root pushing down into the soil profile or not. Because if the figure that comes up on that penetrometer is more than 300 psi, then the roots will, the growing root tip will not be able to penetrate that soil and will either go sideways or just simply stop. And unfortunately, we don't recognise just how deep a lot of plant roots go. And in my research of establishing just what is being found by, and most of it's European work, but nonetheless, the ability of the plant to push its roots down can extend much further than what we think it can. And for example, the ryegrass plant will actually send its roots down about 2 metres if given the opportunity. But if you've got a compaction layer there, then it's going to stop where that compaction layer is. And that can happen through cultivation. It can happen through the chemistry of the soil. It can happen through machinery. So, there's a whole number of factors there, and it can be hidden. And people have grown up with the expectation that come, middle of November, everything starts to dry off. But if we investigate what's actually taking place down in that root zone, we find that there's an explanation why we're short selling ourselves in the way that we farm, because we're not actually going deeper into the soil with our plant roots.
Yeah. Love that. Selling ourselves shorts. And we think we're doing all the right things, but, we are definitely leaving lots of yield and profits on the table. Gerhard, you have shared so many amazing things. Is there any final thoughts that you want to leave the listeners and viewers with?
I guess the thing that I find fascinating is that we tend to get fairly easily sidetracked and focused on one aspect of our holistic growing. And really, I take a lot of comfort in being able to look at a situation and apply the new NPK to it. And simply it is about understanding that one of those is going to be a limiting factor at some time, and that limiting factor is going to impinge on the ability for the other two parameters, if you like, of that growing system to actually perform as well. So you affect the pH, for example, you'll affect the biology in the soil, and you'll affect the physical condition of the soil. And it came to me some years ago when we did some work for a dairy farmer that from one year to the next, the pH can change enormously. So and I picked pH as an example, but the limiting factor wasn't the fact that he didn't have enough lime on the ground, because one year we took the soil test results and we had a pH of 5.4. This was done through the lab. The next year, also in the February, it was 6.4. And I went back to the farmer and said, how much lime did you apply? And basically said, none. And the reason for it is because the dairy industry was actually at a lull there. It took a big dip, I think a 40% cut in milk price, and therefore he couldn't apply anything. He didn't have the financial resources to do so. But then we looked more closely where the soil was at between the 2 years, and we'd had this autumn break quite early in the 2nd February compared to the 1st February, where the conditions were dry and the biology wasn't working. We got the penetrometer out as well and found that the soil was very compacted in the 1st year for obvious reasons, but not so in the 2nd year. So a basic measure like pH needs to be looked at more carefully and not draw a conclusion that it's just the lack of lime. And so I guess it's about looking at all the data, looking at all the conditions, and understanding that that's dynamic, that it will change, and we need to work with those changes and constantly monitor and measure so that we can manage.
And we had a great chat with Brian early on during the week, and he spoke just of that topic about how pH has a lot more substructures, and that is so important to understand that, because a pH reading can be very skewed, and you could get the same readings and the actual biology of the soil is completely different. One, it can be thriving, and the other could be, and throwing lime is not the solution to acidic pH reading. So that's another reinforcement. Well, Gerhard, it's been absolutely a pleasure hanging out with you today. I just want to confirm that I've got the new NPK right in my mind, and it's nutritions, physical, and key biology.
Correct.
Awesome.
Nutrition.
Pat on the back for me.
Well done. Quick learner.
Awesome. And I am a kinesthetic learner, and that's why these interviews help me so much, because I get to hang out and learn so much, and then also gift that back to the community as another opportunity of them to learn. And so it's, really, really a great opportunity that I have, and I'm very, very grateful to have spent this afternoon with yourself. How can people reach out and spend more time with you and work closer with you?
I guess in the first instance, have a look at the resources that they've got on my website, or, linked back to Farming Secrets, of course, as well. But if they want to deal with me directly, you can go to my website. That's okay with you, Ray?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll pop links around the video somewhere around wherever this video is. There'll be links to work with yourself. And on Farming Secrets, if you type your name, Gerhard's name, you'll find lots of information. And we've got a whole video series on the new NPK that is available for instant download as well. So very
and there's been quite a bit of recording done by Hugo and Helen over the years that I've known them since mid-'80s, I think, or early 90s. So, we've known each other for a long time, and they've been kind enough to record a lot of what I've done in the early days. I mean, we've moved on a bit as well, and compost and compost tea brewing are two of the things that I specialise in. So, again, the website's there as a resource. It's there to make purchases, but that's not what drives what we're doing.
Absolutely.
It is about sharing information and providing possibilities for people to extend their growing knowledge and their application of that knowledge.
And teach it to their neighbours. Learn out loud.
Yeah.
And be an example. Yep, absolutely. Yep. Well, thank you very much for hanging out with us today. It's been absolutely a blast to get to hear your wisdom and share that with the community. So until next time, everyone, remember to get your hands dirty and start digging deeper into your soils.
And bring that planet back to life.
Absolutely. Hear, hear.
Thank you.